So my next guest is Alex Valencic. Alex is a professional educator, former small business owner, avid reader, and movies lover. He's also passionate about music and all fine arts. He absolutely loves teaching and seeing the light go on as individuals suddenly understand a new concept. He's an avid volunteer with the Boy Scouts of America, Operation Snowball, Inc., and the Cebrin Goodman Teen Institute. After 3 years of substitute teaching and 7 years of teaching fourth grade full-time, his current role is that of curriculum coordinator for 21st century learning with Freeport School District number 145 in northwestern Illinois. He works with teachers on project-based learning, inquiry strategies, technology integration, and implementing the 4 C's of 21st century learning: creativity, communication, critical thinking, and collaboration. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
I feel like there are so many that I could draw from, but the one I've been thinking about a lot lately is when I was still in the classroom. I worked in a school building. We were a public school, but our building specifically had a really strong reputation in the community for being very centered on the fine arts. We had art, music, dance, drama teachers. We had a collaboration with the local Center for Performing Arts. But I noticed that people did not look at our school as a school that embraced academics. So I wanted to find a way to get us out of that rut of being, oh, it's a good art school, but that's all they have going for, and said, how can we elevate the work that we do with academics as well? And while I know your guests can't see me, I have this thick curly hair that I've had for years. And I wanted a way to encourage students to really embrace reading every single day. So I looked at the number of students we had, I did some math, and I put a proposal to the staff, the teachers I worked with, and said, let's challenge our school community to log 1 million minutes of reading in one school year. And as the incentive, if we reach the goal, we can just shave my entire head completely bald. And we'll do it as a school assembly so the kids can watch this happen. And I will grow my hair out the whole year.
Wow.
So we started this the beginning of the school year, and it went all year long. Students would stop me in the hall and they would just lovingly taunt me. One of my favorite was a first grader who frequently reminded me that they were going to shear me like a sheep at the end of the year because of all the reading they were doing. And it was this great community experience. We got out of that rut of being kind of a one-trick school, and also became known as a school that we did a lot of reading. We did reach the goal. We exceeded it. We shaved my head. We didn't get it bald during the school assembly because it turns out that, unlike in Hollywood movies, you can't just take clippers and just buzz through and remove all the hair. It took 2.5 hours. We had to dismiss students from the assembly. There was a faculty meeting that our principal had our superintendent coming to, so they had to release most of the staff, and it was just me and my colleague who was cutting all my hair. We finally finished and we walked in afterwards, and it was it was a lot of fun. So of course we ended up repeating that 2 more times over the course of the years I was in that building, where the next time we shaved my head because of reaching a math goal. It was supposed to be 1 million math problems and we only did half of it. So the student body voted to shave half my head, and I had to go to work the few days of school with half my hair completely shaved off. And then we did it 1 more time for PE with the jump rope for heart program. And the winning class got to be the ones who actually cut all my hair off. But it just reminded me how important it is to get out of those ruts and be creative in doing things that are going to excite and energize the community.
Yeah, that definitely is a story. I was giggling because just the thought of how long it took, right? That they weren't prepared for the whole shaving process is not just taking a razor to your head, right? That they had to just dismiss everybody, right? And you were stuck there still with somebody trying to work on your head. But kudos to you in that you were volunteering your hair, right? and it's grown back just the same. And just to motivate kids, right? I think that's kind of funny how they would taunt you in the hallway, right? But it kept them going to reach the goal, right?
I still have some of the pictures students drew as their reflections from the end of the year. Also, I keep them on my bulletin board with their notes of Mr. V got us to read, and we shaved his head, and so it was just overall a great way to get out of those trenches.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Talk to me a little bit about your work with the drug prevention volunteerism that you've been doing. Your website says you've been involved with that for 22 years.
Yeah. So way back when I was in middle school, I participated in a program that's drug prevention and like youth leadership. It's called Snowflake. It's for middle school students. And then when I got into high school, the high school program was called Snowball. And the idea is that if we start with some of those small, simple efforts to help young people avoid the temptations of drug and alcohol abuse, it can grow from those small things into a bigger and bigger movement and community, which is where that name is Snowball comes from. And in 1999, I was invited to participate in a statewide leadership conference. It was the Illinois Teen Institute. It has since been renamed the Cebrin Goodman Teen Institute, as the Goodman Foundation in Illinois made a very generous contribution to help fund the program when Illinois was going through some very difficult financial cuts. So we were able to rename the program in honor of the Goodman's granddaughter, Cebrin Goodman. But within the program, we are a drug prevention program. We want to do what we can to reduce the use and abuse of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. But we recognize that it happens most effectively when we teach youth replacements for those risky behaviors. With no disrespect towards Nancy Reagan, but in the 80s, just saying no wasn't enough. Saying no left it open where there was nothing that we were teaching young people what to say yes to. So we have shifted a lot of our focus to training youth leadership, recognizing that change will happen when young people are encouraging each other to make healthy risks, make positive choices, instead of just saying, don't do drugs. And that's been involved with it ever since, through the high school Snowball program, through the summer statewide program, the Teen Institute, that this year is going to be one of the few years that I'm not going to be there as a volunteer staff because the dates conflict with my school district's summer learning program that I'm assisting with. But I love the focus of telling youth, you can make a difference in your community, and adults are here to support you in making that difference rather than telling youth what they should be doing.
And you talked to me a little bit in the pre-chat just about kind of those, the drugs that are more prevalent out there, right? We all know about the opioid crisis, but when we were growing up, it was a lot of the teenage drinking and maybe smoking marijuana, which is now legal in a lot of states, but you have to be 21. But what are you seeing as the main like drugs of choice for the teens that they're getting addicted to?
I think what we're seeing is that, well, as you said, like alcohol, tobacco, they're always going to be a problem because they're so just prevalent and generally acceptable in our society. Seeing much more increase of marijuana use, opioid addictions, and prescription medications. And that third one, I think, is becoming one of those biggest concerns because it's very easy to access prescription medications. There are times when there'll be events held where people will just go into their parents' medicine cabinet and grab bottles of pills or handfuls of pills, and then they'll have parties and just dump them all into a bowl and grab handfuls, and it'll be like, oh, let's see what happens. It's incredibly dangerous. That there's an incredible loss of life and health issues that come out of that. And so we're recognizing that, yes, we still want to discourage the use of tobacco and the use of underage drinking, but we've definitely had to shift that focus to the opioids and the prescription medications, that there's sometimes when young people don't realize that they're abusing the medication. If something gets prescribed as a use as necessary, they're not being told what necessary means. So they may overuse it for them and being in an addiction to it. So definitely trying to help raise the awareness of the appropriate use of medication to make sure you don't demonize medication either, because medication has such an important value in our lives that they're life-saving medications for so many people. We don't want the youth to avoid using medication altogether. So teaching them the proper use of it, recognizing what is the right way to use them, and who to come to when they have questions, whether it's a teacher, a mentor in a leadership program, being able to talk to their doctors to make sure that they're getting the right information. What we definitely don't want them to do is to get the information on that, the typical school playground idea, or really today is more of going online and Googling it. Because I think Google, as much as I love it as a research, getting some basic information can also give some really harmful information when it comes to substance abuse.
Yeah, and that's the fine line between what is actual fact and what is fiction, right? When they're looking online. And you also mentioned that we don't have data from 2020 and the shutdowns and how much of the prescription drugs and opioids were abused among teens. So in the organization you volunteer with, how are you guys moving forward kind of with the lack of data from last year? Are you kind of just assuming the use has gone up, or?
So Illinois, we every year normally administer, it's called the Illinois Youth Survey. It's a voluntary survey that's filled out. School districts will agree to give it to all their students. Usually it's mostly middle school and high school students who take it. And it was administered in 2019, but in 2020, they were not able to do it. So a lot of the programming and policy making is based on that 2019 data, that as we look at trends over a long term, numbers go up, they go down a little bit. There's been a general downward trend, which has been really important for us to see that these leadership programs and prevention programs are doing what we believe they do, that youth drug abuse is going down overall. But because we don't have that data from 2020 and we won't have it for 2021 either, we are already, well, I say we, the organization is reaching out to schools and districts, asking them to sign up for 2022, because we know that we need that current data to keep informing us. But we're just relying on the 2019 data. And I know that if anyone's interested in looking further, you can check out the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health. I know, Dean, I was telling you that there's a national organization also. I can never remember what their name is, but the Illinois Association for Behavioral Health is the one that hosts the Illinois Youth Survey data. I believe it's also a collaboration with the University of Illinois.
Okay, great. I will put that in the show notes, and people can find out more information about that survey. And I think they have a similar survey in Colorado that I've seen gone out to youth in the springtime. So, as mentioned, the last time I saw that was in 2019 as well. So let's shift gears a little bit. On your Twitter handle and profile, you talk about being a bibliophile. So let's talk a little bit about some of your favorite books and undiscovered treasures, maybe something you've read recently.
Reading, it has been a passion of mine since I was very little. And I give credit to my mother for it, that from a very early age, she was always reading to us. And I will always remember the very first book I read on my own, which is the first one I give on a list anytime someone wants me to talk about it, was Danny and the Dinosaur, which was one of those early reader, I can read all by myself books, and it absolutely was. And I remember still when I was in kindergarten, I read it for the first time by myself, and just that feeling of success and accomplishment of saying, yes, I read a book completely on my own. But I still want my mom to read to me too. So we would read together. Now I continue to read. I have stacks of books on my desk at work. I have stacks of books on my nightstand. I have an entire bookshelf behind my bed, which is my ongoing, ever-growing, to-be-read bookshelf. And then, of course, I have my own library at home. I love anytime someone visits and sees it, they're like, Alex, haven't you ever heard of a library? And I'm like, yes, what do you think this is? This is my library. Oh, sure. A book that I'm reading right now is The 12 Characteristics of Deliberate Homework by Eric Youngman. I love this book. If you look at my Twitter profile, you'll also see one of my pinned tweets is about a homework menu that I created for students to allow them to be able to make more choices in what their homework was, grew out of understanding and realization that sending a math homework sheet home for students every single day just because we had them wasn't really meeting the needs of my students, especially when I had students who were involved in lots of extracurricular activities and didn't have time to do homework. And the homework wasn't helping them with the growth that they needed. So I gave them more options by giving them a menu. And Dr. Youngman, his book talks more about how do we make sure that, especially your older students, when you have multiple classes every day and every teacher is assigning a large load of homework every night, we're asking students sometimes to spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day on homework after they spent all day in school. Dr. Youngman recommends for secondary teachers creating homework as a team, giving students more time to complete those tasks. So that's one of the books that I'm currently reading. One of my go-tos, I occasionally will have someone ask me, what is a recommendation of a book to read? Like if I were to say, what's one book? Well, that's really unfair to ask me because there's so many. But I think one that I would default to recommending anyone check out is The Ball by Todd Whitaker. It's a simpler book. It's an extended metaphor allegory for keeping our eye on the ball when it comes to teaching students. Sometimes we get caught up in the work and we get caught up with being stuck in the trenches. And we need to get ourselves out of that. And what are the things that are making education fun, not just for our students, but for us as the educators? Because I believe passionately that we need to have fun at work. Because if we're not having fun, the students are not going to have fun either. They're gonna feed off of that energy we have. So anyone who hasn't read Todd's book, The Ball, I recommend that. And really any book Todd Whitaker has written. I mean, he's definitely one of those very prolific writers that he has something for everybody. One other recommendation I'll make, I'll just give a third one, as if someone's interested in getting deeper into research related to changes we need to make in education, recommend anything by Dr. Tony Wagner. He wrote Most Likely to Succeed, The Global Achievement Gap, and Creating Innovators. So I guess I kind of cheated and just gave you 3 at once, but all of those books help us focus on realizing that what we're doing in education today, by and large, is a system that was designed in the late 1800s. And in the late 1800s, it was innovative, it was revolutionary, it was progressive, it changed public education in America, and in a way, changed public education in the world. But now it's 2021, and we're still using that exact same model. Which incidentally for me is anytime someone sees my job title and they say, oh, the 21st century teacher and learning coordinator. Alex, we're 2 decades into the 21st century. Can't we drop that title? Well, unfortunately, we still have a system that was designed in the 20th, and we still have teachers using practices from the 19th. So once we get everybody out of the 19th and the 20th centuries, I will be glad to drop that job title and just doing teaching and learning.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like we were still using that 21st century, but we are using these antiquated ways of doing things. And I hope as we come out of the pandemic and start shifting the way we teach and the way we learn professionally, that we're able to then move on and put some of these antiquated things from the 1800s away. And I was going to say, Todd Whitaker, I've had him on the podcast. I think it was in episode early 20s or something, but he was so humble, right? Like, he's written so many books and has made an impact on teachers and leaders, but very, very humble man about what he's written. So, but thank you for those recommendations. I will put those in the show notes. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you talk about that you really love performing arts, and, right now we haven't been able to go to concerts for a while, and there are some set up for the summer, but tell me about some of the music and musicals and things that you like doing. You talked in the pre-chat about being on the tech side of some productions as well. Yeah,
so it's another one of those hobbies and passions that grew out of high school, and I come from a large family. I have 5 older brothers, and it seems like all of them were involved in the fine arts programs in one way or another. So when I got into high school, it seemed natural that I was like, of course, I'll audition for the school play because everyone in my family does. I auditioned for the school play. I did not get a part. I look back at it and I'm not surprised at all. Like I'm not an actor, not even like remotely close to being an actor. I literally just like took this script and just like read it, probably like a monotone. So it's like, okay, being on the stage is not my thing. But one of my friends said, hey, they need people who can help out with the tech side of doing like the spotlights for the shows. Do you want to do it with me? And it's like, sure, why not? That way a lot of my friends were in the stage production, so let me hang out with them during rehearsals. So I started doing that, and I did that tech side of operating the follow spots the whole time I was in high school. Every single event the high school did that involved spotlights, which wasn't just plays and musicals, but also any kind of community events, I was there doing it. And I like to point out that these weren't the computer programmed mounted to the ceiling spotlight. These were the old, I swear those things weighed like 1,000 pounds, huge, clunky, not well balanced lights that you'd have to lift up from a base and just lean against you. And then I had to like hike them up the stairs of the bleachers that was our gym that doubled as our performing arts space because we didn't have an auditorium, and would stand on a platform that was not well constructed. It was very rickety, and like it was just my home during the plays and musicals though. And I became very protective of that. But I loved the diversity of stage productions that we were able to do. We would do classic plays and we would do plays that no one had ever heard before. Same thing for musicals. I love continuing to keep up with Broadway musicals. Unfortunately, living in Illinois, even though Chicago is not too far away from where I live, I don't get to go see stage productions nearly as much as I'd like to. But I love being able to listen to the soundtracks, especially. That's really like my thing. Is just I love the soundtracks of all those Broadway musicals. So Hamilton, of course, is one that I think I've listened to that soundtrack well over 100 times in the last couple of years. We bought it and just listened to it on repeat for several months that we had it, just because I feel like it's such a great piece of music. We are fortunate in our community. We found out it's kind of that secret that isn't like not really a secret, but people don't know much about is we have performing arts groups that in this summer they'll be able to start up doing productions. Then the high school and school district, they have a phenomenal fine arts program, and this in less than a month they're going to be doing one of their end of year productions. They're going to be doing a production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. They partner with our local park district that has an outdoor performance area, and the students are going to be able to use that so they can do the play without having to worry about some of the restrictions of social distancing and auditorium not being available. Because when you're able to be outdoors, you can have a much larger audience because you can have people spread out. So that's on like the stage production side of things. But then also, I've been in bands since I was in 5th grade. I played the trumpet. The choice to play the trumpet is really it's a very practical matter. Again, with those older brothers, 2 of them played the trumpet, 1 played the saxophone, and 2 were percussionists. So my choice was trumpet, saxophone, or percussion. The saxophone has way too many buttons and levers on it for me, and I have no rhythm when it comes to percussion. So trumpet it was, because there were 3 keys and I could do it.
Yeah.
So I've played the trumpet since I was in 5th grade, and then I sing in choirs. Haven't been able to do that in a while because of the pandemic, but looking forward to a time when we can get choirs up and running again and be able to have that aspect of that sharing community music.
Yeah, and I agree. I've been in choirs since I was in school as well, and hoping to start again, in August and September with that. But are you currently then in a band, and what type of music do you guys play with the trumpet?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
The band. What kind of music do you play when you play the trumpet?
So in band, so it's like concert band, symphonic. ensembles. I haven't been in one since we moved here to Freeport. Haven't been able to find one that I'd be able to, but just doing concert bands. I did jazz band when I was in high school, also marching bands. That's been my area. It's mostly the concert bands and symphonic ensembles.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, talk to me a little bit about your blog. So, you put a post in, I think, every week or so. And then you've done a couple of recent blogs about the future of education, 21st century skills, as you mentioned a little bit earlier. So talk to me kind of about some of your ideas. And you're also blogging for Teach Better Team as well.
Yeah, so blogging for me was something, it started way back when I was working as a substitute teacher, that a friend of mine just wanted to know. They're like, what do substitute teachers actually do? Because you realize that from a student's perspective, they don't really know what the experience of a substitute is. That especially growing up attending public schools in the 90s, it seemed like the substitute teacher was the person who wheeled the TV cart into the room. You watched a movie in the morning, you went to lunch, and you watched another movie in the afternoon. And the substitute was just there to, make sure that nobody killed anyone and no one got like ceiling. So I started blogging to reflect on my experiences as a substitute. And it started just being able to share where I was going, what I was teaching each day. Then when I was able to get my full-time teaching position, I wanted to keep sharing those reflections. And for me, blogging has always been for my personal reflection. I don't pay attention to the number of people who visit my blog. To me, I don't care if anyone checks it out or not. I'm pretty certain that there's been a long period of time where nobody's reading my blog. There have been times when I think maybe my mother and my wife's grandmother may be the only ones who were reading it. But I find blogging is just a great way for me to reflect and compile my own thoughts, which is why I kept it up when I took on this current role of working in the curriculum department. I love reflecting on the changes that we are making in education. I love being in my district, being a part of those changes of shifting the focus of the work to being more student-centered, to be more differentiated in everything we do. A recent post I wrote was related to a change my school district has made in terms of professional development, that many teachers are familiar with the classic once and done sit and get model of PD, where, if it's a district institute day, you go in the morning, you gather in like an auditorium, and there's someone who's paid a lot of money to yell at you from the stage, shouting out their catchphrases and whatnot. And then they go and you never hear from them again. Mm-hmm. And we realize in our district that we have a wide range of expertise in our district. We have teachers who have been working in our district for over 30 years. We have teachers who have been in our district for 30 days. Giving everybody the same professional development at the same time in the same way is completely contrary to everything we say teachers should be doing in their own classrooms. So we developed a differentiated model of professional development that has different progressions. We recognize that there are some types of professional development that's really more of the training that everybody has to get. It's required by law. Blood pathogen training. Every teacher ever has to go through that training. As a colleague of mine likes to put it, if it's wet and sticky and it's not yours, don't touch it. Have to go through that training. Yeah. So those basic entry-level PD, that's that first progression of professional development that as I was explaining this in this blog post of mine, that we start with that, but then we recognize that we have topics that we can say, as a district, we want everybody to come around a couple of basic topics. How you approach that can be up to you. So we're going to give you options for that. Mm-hmm. There's teachers who they don't want to just sit in that PD session and then never talk about it again. There's some who they want to be able to dig deeper. And that became our third progression of let's get teachers and allow them to meet together in groups and cohorts to continue their professional learning, to allow those PD sessions to be more than once and done events. And then the fourth progression is what teachers are doing on their own when they're listening to podcasts, when they're reading blogs, when they're reading books that they picked up at a conference that they went to. It's that very open-ended, the teachers are selecting their own professional learning. I love being able to use my blog to reflect on how this process has worked for us, because I was writing it, I was able to think through things and say, oh, no, we put this piece into place and it didn't really work the way we had initially intended. So maybe we can try doing it another way. And that's where the blogging, it's self-reflection, which means sometimes my blog posts, I may start in one place, and by the time I have ended up in a very different place than I started with. And I think that's an important thing for people to be able to be comfortable with doing in their writing, that your writing doesn't have to be completed before you even start. You can allow it to be a journey of self-reflection and learning as you go. So that's what my blog, it has been all about that. It is a record of my journey in education and the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked hearing how that started out when you were a sub, right? And that people can go back. Is that the same still on your site from back several years back? Yeah, so people can go back and kind of hear about your experience as a sub and then throughout your educational career. And I liked hearing about the job embedded PD. I think a lot of districts are looking at redesigning their PD model, right? It's more of a choose what you need for your particular position. So, that's what I think is going to look like in the next several years. You mentioned a little bit about like teachers listening to podcasts, and that's something I've mentioned when I've had breakout sessions as well. On your website, you also list a few podcasts. So tell me a little bit about kind of what podcasts that you've kind of been a fan of for long, and when you have time to listen to them.
And so podcasting honestly was something I resisted getting into for a long time. So I just felt like, who has time to just like sit and listen to somebody talking? Mm-hmm. And when I got into podcasting was when I had time to do exactly that. I was interviewing for leadership positions all up and down my state after I got in my degree in educational administration. And there were some times when I was driving 2-3 hours one way to go to an interview. And I realized that was a lot of time that I could be engaging in professional learning. So I opened up the podcast app on my phone, searched education leadership. And the first one that popped up was Educators Lead, which is a podcast by Jay Willis. I don't even think it's going on anymore. I know there were some podcasts that would go on and then they just stopped. There was no like, oh, this is the final episode, we're done. It's more like you would get caught up with the episodes and you're like, oh, I guess they're not doing that podcast anymore. Release anything. So I started getting into those, and then each guest would talk about another podcast that they were listening to. So then it just became kind of going from one show to another, where someone would say, oh, have you heard this podcast? You should check out this one. Or I have a podcast. This is my podcast. And I start listening to it. So right now I have a rotation of podcasts that when I listen to them, I always like to go back to the very beginning and listen to that first episode and work through to get caught up on them. Doesn't mean there are some podcasts that I have not started because I just like there's so many episodes. Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy, which everybody tells me I should listen to. I want to listen to it, but I think she has like 200-300, maybe more episodes. I don't know. It's been around for a long time. Some of the ones I'm currently listening to, Teach Better Talk, which it's done by the Teach Better team, which I am a lead ambassador for them. And I'm sure we'll talk about Teach Better in a little bit here, but their podcast is Jeff Gargas and Ray Hewart. And they bring in educators from all over the country, all over the world now to share what they're doing in education. And it's always, they have the same set of questions that they ask. And it's every time I listen to it, for a long time I've listened, go, oh, how would I answer these questions? Mm-hmm. I wonder what I would do if I was on their show. And then I put something on Twitter about that. And they're like, well, Alex, you can be on our show, right? Like, here's the link. All you have to do is sign up. And it's like, oh, really? Cool. So I got to go on to their podcast and be one of their guests. Dave Schmittou, which I believe you had him on your show very recently. Mm-hmm. Here, well, at the time we're recording, not sure how long it'll be before this episode comes out, but he has his podcast of Lasting Learning, which was one that started off of just him talking and sharing his own ideas, and then it became him interviewing guests and getting their input. A show I started listening to fairly recently is the Staff Room podcast by Che Chaney and Pav Wander, which are two educators out of Canada. I believe it's the first international podcast I started listening to. First one of the hosts are outside of the United States. So almost every podcast I listen to is education themed. Not all of them are educational leadership, although I do skew towards those. There have been a few like political and history shows I've listened to as well that have been really informative. One of the historical ones that I recommend everybody check out is Presidential, which the Washington Post released, and Lillian Cunningham gives biographies of all of the presidents of the United States up through Barack Obama. The show was scheduled to go out until the 2016 election, so they didn't have a show ready for Donald Trump or Joe Biden, of course, now, but fascinating to learn about the presidents and their history in things that are not always included in our history textbooks. So it's just, I feel like it's one of those things when it comes to podcasts that if it's something you're interested in learning more about, there's somebody out there who has a podcast about it. And if it isn't, that just means it's time for you to start your own podcast and start telling the world your story.
Yeah, and I'll put those ones that you mentioned in the show notes, and I've followed several of those for a while, but I was kind of resistant like you. The podcasts have been around on Apple at least for 10 to 12 years, right? And I just, why listen to people talk? Like when there's commercials, when I'm listening to music, I don't like listening to people talk, but I'll have my times when I'm running and I'll listen to music, and then I'll have those times when I'll listen to podcasts. So yeah, it's like you get used to those hosts, right? You get used to what their kind of themes are, their topics, like you said, the Teach Better Talk, the questions that they're asking people. So yeah, definitely, agree with you in that sense. And I hope educators are using different podcasts for PD and for, benefit to their practice. So tell me a little bit about getting involved with being an ambassador for Teach Better team, and kind of what you see your role in the next year in kind of reaching out through Teach Better team.
Yeah, so I first got involved with Teach Better Team through their weekly Twitter chat, Mastery Chat. And it's kind of ironic to me as I look back that very first interaction was me being very indignant about something that their CEO had put out about the role of teachers as entertainers in the classroom. That I remember seeing it and just feeling like, how dare you suggest that my job is to entertain my students? I'm not a paid monkey. I'm a professional educator. But then I very quickly realized that what he was talking about was not just entertaining, but engaging students in a way that's going to keep their attention, that is going to be entertaining while connecting to education, which I do. I volunteer at the Boy Scouts of America, and we use a similar motto of keep it simple, make it fun. Things together are how we engage people in the things that we're doing. So I kept coming back to the Teach Better Mastery Chat because I loved being able to expand my professional network and engage in those topics of discussion that were being posted every week. Developed a very good collegial relationship with those individuals, including Chad Ostrowski, who's the CEO of that company. We've connected a lot over the years now and have collaborated on some work in planning professional development. So I'm really glad that I didn't just completely write him off after that one tweet that it just hit me wrong that one day. Yeah. But I quickly learned many of the other things that they had to offer, not just hosting a Twitter chat and also doing their podcast, which I mentioned, but they have a ton of free resources for educators available through their website. And I tell people all the time that as a professional educator, the best way to get me interested in your product is to tell me that you're not going to ask me to pay for it. Because educators are not wealthy, don't have the money things left and right. So when a company says, hey, we made this great resource and we're not going to charge you for it, that's definitely going to get my attention. And at Teach Better, their entire mindset, where the name comes from, is the idea that we want to be better today than we were yesterday. and better tomorrow than we were today. And we do that by making small steps in our lives. We're not out there telling people you're not good enough, you're not you need to be better, you need to be like me. It's saying we need to all be constantly growing. That I told someone just the other day, the day that I feel like I have ascended to the mountaintop and have reached the peak and there's nothing further for me to do, that I've accomplished it all, is the day that someone needs to tell me it's time to retire, because that means that I've stopped growing as an educator. And if I've stopped growing, I'm not doing the work that I need to do to help my students be lifelong learners also. But the Teach Better Ambassador, I get to share this message. The ambassador program started almost a year ago. It was last year in June. And it was a way to just give those of us who have been connected with the Teach Better team for a while already, just a way to recognize that we were sharing and supporting the ideas, the information, that I don't get paid by them, I don't pay them, that I share the resources. And being an ambassador is really just a way of saying, yeah, I'm someone who, I value the work that they do, the way they help educators grow and support education throughout the world, because it's as the Teach Better family grows, it's so much more than just the paid employees of the company. Yes, there are those handful of people who work for Teach Better who, they're the ones who are going out and doing paid professional development with school districts that want to pay them to do that work. But for most of us, we are connected through social media. Ambassadors, we just help people continue to stay connected. When someone reaches out and they go onto either the private Facebook page or they go onto Twitter and say, I'm struggling with connecting my fourth graders with this math concept that we're teaching, who has resources? It is amazing to see the hundreds of people who just jump up and say, yes, resources. My students had that same problem. Here's what I did. Recently, Teach Better has partnered with Education Blueprint, an online organization that houses resources that are all free. It's free to join, it's free to access thousands of education resources. I like to think of it as Education Blueprint is like Teachers Pay Teachers, but without the pay. So again, anytime something's free, I'm always going to be all about supporting that. So most recently, I became a lead ambassador for Teach Better, and I am a lead ambassador for data management. It's one of the big titles that sounds really super fancy, and my role is to help support all of the other ambassadors to help them keep track of the things that they are doing and sharing that Teach Better mindset. Because the ambassador program, it does have different levels for ambassadors, and there are, like swag items and rewards that you can get for reaching different milestones, like participating in live events or joining Twitter chats, sharing out resources on social media, doing professional development in your own building or district related to the work that Teach Better is doing also. Those are all things that people can do. And now we have over 50 ambassadors. It was becoming overwhelming for just 2 people to keep track of it all. So there are now 4 of us who are helping to just support everyone. And for me, it just keeps going back to the idea of Teach Better team. It's the Teach Better family. We support each other, not just in education, but in personal things also. That I was very open about sharing this on social media also, that my wife and I had a baby who was born premature. And while we were in the hospital with our baby, we had members of the Teach Better family sent us gift cards so we could order food. Wow. They reached out and just helped. They're like, hey, traveling back and forth between your house and the hospital, that costs a lot of money in terms of gas. Here's a gift card to use to buy gas. So we support you through this very difficult time. And then, unfortunately, our baby, he passed away while still in the neonatal intensive care unit. These are things that were completely out of anyone's control. And the team just wrapped around showing love and support for someone who most of us have never met in person. We only know each other through our social media connections. But we recognize that those connections are just as real and valid for us as if we worked in the same building with each other. just a week ago, someone who we're connected with through this Teach Better program, he moved from Alabama to Mississippi, and he shared in a Voxer group how, it was stressful moving, having to sell his house, buy his house, his wife and their 4 kids having to move, and he's starting a new job.
Yeah.
And we're like, how can we help? And we were able to come together and send them gift cards to get food. Someone actually sent them like a meal kit from like Portillo's, which is a restaurant in Chicago that has really good hot dogs. Apparently, I've never actually been there, but he was just so excited to see those. Someone's just like sent them food. And we've never met in person. We only know each other through these social media things. So it's Teach Better is not just about the teaching, but it's also about just recognizing the humanity of the educators in the world, that we all need to support each other to lift each other up.
Yeah, and that's so amazing how, they were able to wrap around you while you were going to the NICU, and also when your child passed. It just, like you said, they're located throughout the US and Canada, right? But, I've seen pictures on the Facebook page of, things that they've sent to people, right? And just that community. And it's so important to have, especially, when people were teaching mostly virtual and leading. And, like you mentioned all those resources, like, partnering with Education Blueprint, and also following there's always something on their YouTube channel. Almost every day they have some live chat, or some of them are 30 minutes and some of them are 12-hour events like April 24th. And I think they're hosting those about every 4 months now, correct? Yeah, so it was June and December now, and April they're hosting one as well. So yeah.
I keep trying to convince them to do a full 24-hour live. They have to do it yet. And well, it's, Teach Better, they started in Ohio, United States, and then kind of grew in Illinois, and then they've been spreading out, reaching to Canada. But there are people who are connected with the team now in like Jordan, the United Emirates. There's people in Australia and New Zealand. I don't even know where all the team like has expanded out this family of educators, that beyond just, again, beyond those paid professionals, just the people who are connected. It truly is an international group. And yeah, the YouTube videos, the blogs that they post, I think that they're averaging, actually, I don't even know if the number is now. I think in the month of April, they scheduled like 60, maybe 70, maybe even 100 blog posts in 1 month, because there's just people constantly wanting to share their ideas to connect with other people.
Yeah, and it's so great to hear so many more people getting involved and finding out about their resources. Well, as we wrap up our conversation today, I wanted to ask you, out of everything we talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think of all those things is, we talked about a lot. The one thing I want everybody to remember is that once upon a time, education is a job that could be very isolating. You could go in your classroom, close the door, and be isolated from other people. And now in the 21st century, that isolation is a choice. That there are so many ways to connect, whether it is by reading the books that are being published by educators, whether it's listening to their podcasts, whether it's connecting with professional organizations, paid or free. There are ways for everybody to be connected with somebody else, to find common interests, to be able to support and hold one another up. The choice to be lonely is a choice now, because there's so many ways that we can connect and support one another. And I always want to make sure everybody knows that if they're not sure who to start with who to connect with, they can find me on social media. It's Alex T. Valencic on all the social media platforms. If you misspell my name, you'll probably still find it, because I'm like 99.99% certain I'm the only Alex T. Valencic in the world. So if there's another Alex T. Valencic out there, I need to know who you are. I am totally willing to be that person to connect with, to help support, because my mantra for last year and this year is that we are better together. And I mean that to the very core of it, that we truly are better when we are working together.
That was great to hear. And it's so important that you're able to, provide just that support for educators and share your information. And where can people also find your website? What is the URL for your website?
And so my blog is coordinatingthecentury.wordpress.com. So again, the name, it comes from being the curriculum coordinator for 21st century teaching learning. It's like, how do I condense that down to something that is, I can say in a single mouthful? So it's coordinatingthecentury.wordpress.com. But it's another one that if you Google my name, Alex T. Valencic, I think it's one of the first things that will show up is my blog as well.
Great, great.
Media is definitely the best way to connect with me.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.